Hello and welcome. In this video we will talk about skill 1, which is using tenses in line graphs. Now at the screen you can see a line graph, and this is a very common type of visual in Writing Task 1 IELTS academic. Line graphs always show changes over time or trends, and this gives you an opportunity to use a variety of tenses in your report. And why is it even a good idea to use a variety of tenses in your report? Well, this will directly and in a good way influence the grammar of your report. And grammatical range and accuracy is one of IELTS Writing Task 1 assessment criteria. So of course you need to pay attention to your grammar. Now at the screen you can see a report, and we will talk about it in detail, starting with the first paragraph, the introduction. So introduction in IELTS report is always two parts. It's paraphrase and overview. What is the function of paraphrase? Well, when you're given a line graph or any other type of visual, there's always some kind of description of this graph, and you need to paraphrase this description in order to start your report. So the paraphrasing of the topic is always the first sentence of your report. What is the overview? The overview is the most important information about your graph. So normally it includes 2-3 main features about the graph, and it should not contain any details such as numbers, percents, some specific years. For this you will have your body paragraphs. So how do we write an overview in a line graph? First of all, look at minimums and maximums over the whole period. What does it mean, minimums and maximums? For example, in this graph over here, we're dealing with life expectancy in two types of area: urban areas, the blue line, and rural areas, the black line. And we can see that over the whole period, the blue line, or life expectancy in urban areas, was higher than life expectancy in rural areas. So this is what I mean when I talk about minimums and maximums. And this information goes to the first sentence of the overview. Overall, throughout the provided period, a newborn was expected to live less in rural areas compared to cities. Okay, this is the first sentence of the overview. Another good idea to pay attention to is look at increases or decreases again over the whole period. So how do we do that? Again, in our case, we are dealing with life expectancy at birth, and I want to compare the figures in the beginning of the period, 1990, and the end of the period, 2020. And if I do that, I will see that life expectancy rose. It was around 70 and 68, and it became more. Now this piece of information makes the second sentence. It is also clear that both area types saw an increase in life expectancy. In this graph we are dealing with life expectancy. And what is life expectancy at birth? Well, this is the average number of years that a newborn baby is expected to live. It is always a good idea to use synonyms. So which synonyms can we use here? Well, we can say something like expected life duration. This is a direct synonym. Or we can use phrases like this: how long one is expected to live, or how long one is anticipated to live. And again, in our case, we are talking about life expectancy at birth. So we can take advantage of different synonyms of the word newborn. So we can say a newborn, or a newborn child, or just a child. Avoid the word kid in this case, because kid is informal and we want to stick to more formal style. This is more appropriate for writing task 1 in IELTS. And now at the screen you can see different synonyms of this phrase, life expectancy, which I have used in the report. So, life expectancy, a newborn was expected to live, was anticipated to live, expected life duration. Again, if you use synonyms, it is better for the lexical resource and for the lexical variety and for the overall score. Next, I would like to talk to you about synonyms for the words urban and rural. So for rural, you can use a phrase rural areas or the countryside, or you can replace the word areas with the word territories. And when you write about cities, you can say urban areas or in cities or in the city. So these are the synonyms that I have used in the report. As I was writing the paraphrase of the topic, I decided to replace the word shows over here with compares changes. So this is one of the ways to paraphrase the topic. It's not the only way, but this one is very handy. I also want to pay your attention to the word throughout that I have used in my overview. Throughout is a very useful word when you deal with line graphs, and the meaning is all over the period, in every part of the period. How can you paraphrase the phrase from 1990 to 2020? Well, for example, you can say in the provided period or in the provided time period, like I did. You can also say in the years 1990 to 2020. So these are a few options for paraphrasing. In my introduction, I have used this little phrase over here. It is also clear that this is a nice transition phrase, and sometimes you need them in your report. And you can also use alternatives like the data confirms that, or the data shows that, or according to the statistic. Sometimes when I check reports of my students, I see words like interestingly, unfortunately, luckily, sadly, ironically, and this is actually not the best idea to use such words because they show some attitude, they show some emotions, and this is not appropriate in a report. So do not use them, do not show any attitude. Next, I would like to draw your attention to this nice little phrase over here. It is also clear that both area types saw an increase in life expectancy. And I would like to discuss it in more detail and to show you more examples. So C in this context means be the time or place for something happening. Have a look at this example. 12 European countries saw a drop of over 10% in electricity consumption. So the meaning is there was a drop in 12 countries. And I want to show you another example. Moreover, 2020 saw the lowest revenue in clothes sales. So how can you use this word in your reports? As we have already said, C means be the time or place for something happening. So you can talk about a year, a month, a period, basically about time. And then you can use any form of the word see. Will see a rise, saw a rise. Or alternatively, you can talk about a country or city, a place. For example, like this, a country or city saw a reduction, meaning there was a reduction. See also means something happens with something, as in this example. Over the period, the rate saw a decline by 262 registered crimes, It means a decline happened to the rate. So you can use it, for example, with words emissions, the use, the consumption, and others, with a combination like saw a rise, and it will mean a rise happened. See has a synonym, which is experience, and if you want to add even more variety to your reports, you can use experience and see interchangeably. Have a look at the examples over here. We are moving forward, and next we are going to talk about the second paragraph. But before we do so, I would like to talk to you about the logic of having these two paragraphs. In general, it's a good idea to split your report into paragraphs because it makes the report more organized and more logical. But there always should be some logic to doing this. In this case, I have two body paragraphs, and the first body paragraph is about this period, 1992-2005. It's basically the first half of the period. And the second body paragraph is about the remaining part of the period, 2005 until 2020. Why is that? Well, if you see at the line graph in the beginning of the period, you can see that there were some noticeable changes going on here, some drama, and I want to describe it in more detail. In the second part of the period, though, well, the changes were not so noticeable. It was just, growth, nothing much was happening, so it will give us a shorter paragraph. All right, the first body paragraph. It is usually a good idea to mention the initial figures, so the figures at the beginning of the period. And obviously it's a good idea to say what happened next. Here in the first sentence, I do exactly this. So I mention the initial figures. In the next sentence, I continue and I say what was going on afterwards. By the way, when you are mentioning the figures or the numbers in the beginning of the period or at any other point of the period, you can take advantage of these nice words. Stand at, a verb, and be, a verb, like in these examples. The life expectancy stood at roughly 60 years, or the consumption of fish was about 20 tons. It is also usually a good idea to pay attention to minimums and maximums. And why is that? Well, again, let's have a look at our example line graph, and we see that there is quite a lot of information here. But when you write your report, you shouldn't describe every single figure, right? You should show your ability to select the most important information and to be able to group it. That's why it's a good idea to pay attention to minimums and maximums. For example, here I have did exactly this, and you can see this written in red. After that, having reached the minimum, and here was followed by a decline to the low of about 63 years. When you write about minimums and maximums, you can use these options. So you can use a phrase, reach a peak, or reach a low, or reach a high. You can also mention the figure. For example, reach a high of 72 years. You can also use the words maximums and minimums. You can use increase or any other synonym in a phrase like this, increase to the maximum. You can also use a phrase like this, drop or any other synonym from a peak. And of course, you can use the word peak by itself. Peak as a verb in this case. Life expectancy peaked at 73 years in 2019. And now you can see the minimums in red and maximums. And here I really want to focus your attention on the importance of using a variety of synonyms for going up, going down, stay the same, and going up and down or fluctuating. It is really good for a lexical resource, and it is actually a must-know for describing line graphs. Now you can see the synonyms that I have used in my report. So the synonyms for going up are in green. I have used saw an increase, go up, growing, a slight rise, rocketed, and climbing. And I've also used several synonyms of the words go down, which is fall, plummeting, a decline, decreased. I will attach the list of synonyms to the additional materials to this course, so do check them out. And now I just want to show you one little trick that you can do in order to increase the lexical resource. So have a look at these two examples. Life expectancy increased, and there was an increase in life expectancy. So even though we are using the same word, it is still a paraphrasing, because in the first case, increased is used as the verb, whereas in the second case, we're using the noun. There was an increase. Again, it seems that it's the same word, but it is actually not, and we are showing our paraphrasing skills. And the same happens here in this example. Life expectancy declined as a verb, and life expectancy saw a decline, a noun. So this is how you can easily paraphrase ideas and paraphrase sentences in your report. Respectively. This is a really nice and handy word. It can be used in line graphs and in other types of visuals, and it helps to make your report more concise, more logical and structured, and it also helps you to combine information or to group information. Here, the word follow is in focus. And why am I paying attention to this? Well, that's because this is a nice little way to write more coherent and connected sentences. Especially if you use the word follow like here, which was followed by, it really helps to make your sentences more connected. Have a look at the example. In the countryside, life expectancy reached a low of 63 years, which was followed by a sharp rise. So here in this sentence we have two events, and they are nicely and beautifully packed in one sentence with this phrase, which was followed. Do use it. Finally, we're moving to the last paragraph. And we have already discussed that it makes a lot of sense to talk about initial figures. And as well as that, it is also a good idea to mention final figures. So this is exactly what I'm doing here in the final sentence. Had decreased to approximately 71.5 and 70.5 in rural areas. I'm talking about the final figures in the end of the period. Another thing is, please use words of approximation. So why do you need to use them? Because, for example, look at this figure over here. We cannot say for sure which number it is. That's why we need to use words of approximation. These are words like roughly, approximately, about, just under, just above, some, or around. As you can see, there are several synonyms, so this is yet another way to show lexical variety. In my report, I have used 5 synonyms of these words. Finally, guys, I really want to pay your attention to the importance of using linking devices. It can be words or phrases or grammar structures and pronouns. They directly influence your score in coherence and cohesion criterion. Here I have colored different linking devices that I have used. And for example, the linking phrases in black show the idea of comparison and contrast. It's words like compared to, whereas, in contrast, however. Linking devices in brownish color over there, they're just like transition phrases, and sometimes you need them to connect your sentences. The words in purple show the sequencing, so they show what happened when or what happened after what. Also, they help to connect your sentences into one united piece of text. And the words in green, these are pronouns, and they are also linking devices, so they help to connect sentences. Okay, I want to remind you that in this video we are talking about the skill of using tenses in line graphs. So we have already discussed that line graphs show changes over time, and that's why it's so easy to use different tenses in them. So which tenses can we use in line graphs? Well, we can use all past tenses actually. Past simple, past continuous, past perfect, and past perfect continuous. Let's talk about them in detail. So, past simple, this is the tense that you will use a lot if you're writing about the past. Here at the screen you can see different examples of past simple, like reached, was, stood, was followed, increased, there was a rise, fell, experienced, and so on. Now you can see different examples of the use of past simple in the report. Again, this is a staple tense. You will have to use it, and this is the most basic tense, but still it's very necessary. The next past tense is past continuous, and it is used to describe continuous actions or continuous processes of changes. The examples are was growing, were rising, was increasing, was climbing, etc. I have used this tense 2 times in my report over here, and was growing marginally, and was continuously increasing. So again, this tense is used to show a lasting event, an event that was in progress. Now we are continuing with more advanced tenses, and past perfect is one of them. So past perfect, for example, had fallen, or had decreased, or had increased, is used to describe actions which finished before another action in the past. For example, you can use it with by 2005, before reaching the minimum, until 2020. This is how I have used past perfect in my report. By the end of the period, life expectancy had decreased. Now, this tense is more advanced than, for example, past simple or past continuous. And it's actually quite easy to use it in line graphs. Finally, past perfect continuous. For example, had been falling, had been growing, or had been remaining. This tense is used to describe continuous actions that finished before another action in the past. As you can see, this is like a hybrid, like a combination of the 2 previous tenses, the past perfect and the past continuous. Look how I have used this tense in my report. In the same year, these figures started to fall and had been plummeting until 1995. So the meaning is the process of plummeting finished until 1995. A very common confusion that my students have is this. So past simple or past perfect. What do we use? Grew or had grown? Well, let's have a look at these 2 examples. Overall, between 1990 and 2020, life expectancy grew. And by 2019, life expectancy had grown to roughly 70 years. So, past perfect shows that one event finished. This is the key word here. It finished before another event in the past. So it is important that we compare 2 past events. We must have 2 past events. In our case, we are talking about growth, which is the first event, and the beginning of 2019, which is the second event. In other words, the event of growth had already finished when 2019 started. And past perfect shows exactly this. Life expectancy had already grown when 2019 started. The easiest way to use past perfect is with this preposition over here, by. For example, by the end of the period, by 2019, by 2010. Like really, guys, this is the easiest way to use this complicated and advanced grammar. Again, have a look at how I have used this tense in my report. By the end of the period. So the bottom line is, if you are writing about a line graph, and the line graph is about the past, like in this case, you have a good opportunity to show 4 tenses which is a good opportunity to increase the score in grammatical range and accuracy. So do use this opportunity. Do use all these tenses. Finally, in the end, I would like to talk to you about different demographic rates, which you can see in IELTS graphs. And let's begin with the birth rate. So birth rate is the total number of live births per 1,000 individuals of a population in a year. For example, here we can see a bar chart which shows a ranking with the highest average birth rate. And there are a few examples over here. Next is fertility rate. It is actually very similar to birth rate, but technically it means the average number of children that a woman will have or can have during her childbearing years. This visual over here, a bar graph, is about total fertility rate in Europe in 2021. And an example sentence can be this: in this year, Turkey had the highest fertility rate with roughly 2 children being born alive to a woman during her lifetime. So quite possibly that you will have to write about fertility rates in your writing task 1 in IELTS test. So next is population growth rate. Here again we are having a bar graph which is about population growth. And the population growth or population growth rate is the increase, the going up in the number of people in a population. Population, I'm sure you know what population is, but I will just make it super clear. So population is how many people live in a country, city, or another place. And here at the screen you can see a pie chart, which is about global population by continent. Employment rate. This is also quite common, and maybe your graph will be about that. So employment rate is about how many people are employed, how many people work. And usually we're talking about working age population, which is from 15 to 64. Here you can see a bar graph which demonstrates or illustrates employment rate in some European countries. And for example, about Sweden, we can say that nearly 75.5% of working age population in Sweden were employed. And about Switzerland, we can say that the employment rate was the highest. Unemployment rate is also possible to see in IELTS visuals. And as you can guess, this is how many people of working age are not employed. Here we are looking at the line graph about Turkey, about Turkish unemployment rate. Literacy rate. Well, literacy is the ability to read and write. So literacy rate is how many people can read and write. Here we can see a line graph which depicts global adult literacy rate. You can also come across the word illiterate, which is the opposite of literate and means cannot read or write. This line graph over here shows some breakdown of education level, and we can see that quite a lot of people in India in 2011 were illiterate, which means they couldn't read or they couldn't write. And that's it for this video. In the next episode, we will talk about skill 2, which is making comparisons. So I'll see you there.